Good morning. I hope I am visible and audible to all of you. Today we are meeting for the second time for the second class. In the first class, day before yesterday, we started with a part of your syllabus, ancient and medieval. And after having a brief discussion on the subject, that how history is a study of the evolution of cultures and civilizations. We also discussed culture as something which is man-made, which can be differentiated and distinguished from the nature that is supposed to be the God-made. Civilization is a specific stage of cultural development in which we notice some more advanced features such as urbanization, art of writing, and also a greater degree of cultural complexities. Then we proceeded to understand ancient, medieval, modern, not as distinct time brackets completely separated from one another, but as historical phases characterized by certain traits, and these traits appear to be somewhat overlapping. That is, some ancient traits continuing even in the modern time. And then we started with concrete topics like prehistory, proto-history, and the historical phase. Prehistory as a part of the human past for which written records are not available, and non-availability is not due to what we can say any loss of the records. It is generally supposed to be that those cultures were illiterate, art of writing had yet not developed. Then proto-history as a phase of history in which we have cultures which were literate once, but their scripts have yet not been deciphered. And then the historical phase, for which we have both archaeological as well as literary sources of our historical reconstruction. We use the term historical reconstruction for the art of history writing, since cultural traits belonging to the past are reconstructed in the minds of historians on the basis of available records or available sources. And of course, that is going to be a very subjective affair. So this was the essence of the last class. And then we started with prehistoric cultures. We identified 5 cultures, maybe having different cultural traits, but one basis for us to group them or to club them together as prehistoric cultures is their mutual and common absence of the art of writing. And we identified certain cultures like, if you remember, Paleolithic, Mesolithic, Neolithic. These 3 stages associated with what we call a Stone Age in the progress of historical evolution. And then some of the Metal Age cultures also placed in the same category, that is prehistoric cultures. Like the 4th one, we can say Chalcolithic. We also use the term Copper Age for this. And then we have the 5th one, that is megalithic. Megalithic is also associated with what we can say Iron Age. A large part of Iron Age is part of historical, but a fragment of Iron Age is also part of prehistoric, that is for which we have no written records. Then yesterday we also discussed that as part of our strategy to know what to know, that about these 5 cultures we should know certain things, like we should know the chronology, if you remember. We should also know the phases, if any, or which can be segregated or separated. Then we should know about the tools, for the simple reason that our knowledge about them is largely based on the study of their tools. Then we should also know about their climate, which provided them with resources, with opportunities, and also posed some obstacles, defining the pace of their cultural development. And for any process of development, not only natural resources, but even cultural resources or human resources, that is man-made resources, are also important. So we can talk about this aspect as human species. These different species defining the availability of human resource. And then we can talk about their subsistence pattern. Then we can also talk about their settlement pattern. And then if anything specific happening in any other area of life, we can place under this category, that is other developments. As we can easily understand that with time, these other developments are going to be more important, because climate once fixed is going to be fixed forever. Human species once fixed, going to be fixed, if not forever, at least for till our time. Subsistence pattern is something which is keep on changing from time to time. The same is the case with settlement pattern. But once we have the beginning of settled life, once we have the beginning of urban life, even settlement pattern is not going to be very important for us, because that will now start representing what we say historical continuity. So more changes will take place in this matter, that is other areas. Here we can include social life, political life, and all other aspects of life which in due course of the time became prominent. Now based on this, I shared some notes with you. I hope you have gone through those notes and have found them comfortable. Notes are strictly according to the scheme that we have just discussed, and we discussed also in the last class. And since we are supposed to discuss whatever is shared in the written form in the classes too, we also had a discussion on the Paleolithic, that I took out the Paleolithic, and then we talked about Paleolithic chronology, Paleolithic tools, Paleolithic climate, Paleolithic human species, Paleolithic subsistence pattern that was based on hunting, food gathering and scavenging, Paleolithic settlement pattern. When we talk about the settlement pattern, we talk about so many things like geographical distribution, we talk about ecological systems, we also talk about habitational structures, if any. Is it okay? This is what we discussed, that we have to know these many things. Very simple single story, that at this stage of cultural development, this man living under this kind of climatic conditions, utilizing opportunities offered by the climate and facing the obstacles created by the climate with the help of these tools, what kind of life, that is what kind of subsistence pattern the man was capable of developing, and what was the settlement pattern of the time, and if there is any other remarkable achievement. So already all the scattered facts and details of the prehistory we have tried to put in form of a single story. And this is the story of evolution of cultures and civilizations. Evolution of subsistence pattern, evolution of climate, evolution of human species, all at the same time in their mutual interaction in an interdependent manner to make the facts and details more meaningful for us. So I hope this approach is clear to all of you, and you have gone through the class notes shared on Paleolithic, and you have found that everything that we discussed in the class are written. And now we can proceed further to talk about Mesolithic, Neolithic, Chalcolithic and Megalithic. The details already shared with you, class notes already shared with you. So we can have a brief discussion in the classroom, of course on the same topics which have already been shared with you. So now Paleolithic we have discussed in the last class. Now we can proceed further and we can now take note of the Mesolithic. No need to write because everything you have received in writing. You just pay attention to understanding part, that now we are going to talk about Mesolithic. And this is what we have to talk about the Mesolithic. Other areas are part of extraordinary. And this exam is, as we discussed, never about extraordinary or chase for extraordinary, because that is endless process that will kill your time management, everything. It is always about what we can say, extraordinary command over ordinary. So if we establish this, I think our position is going to be better than others, and that is the objective of this preparation, that we just have to be better than others. It is not about mastering some absolute universe. So now if we talk about the Mesolithic, the first dimension, as you must have read also in the class notes, if you have gone through those class notes, that when we talk about the chronology, of course it cannot be fixed in a very watertight and compartmentalized manner. In some parts we have coexistence of Paleolithic and Mesolithic, and that is quite obvious. In history, this kind of overlapping is always possible. So what we can do is that for Mesolithic we can have a broader chronology, though exact periods are not important, phases are not important. But in the Indian subcontinent, Mesolithic can be placed between what we can say 15,000 BP, that is before present, to around 5,000 BP. Is it okay? So this 10,000 years we generally assign to this phase of cultural development that is termed as the Mesolithic. Mesolithic is also termed as Epipaleolithic. And for long this period was not recognized as a distinct phase of development for obvious reasons. And generally it was perceived as a phase of transition between Paleolithic and Neolithic. Of late it has received separate acknowledgement, separate recognition, and that too particularly in the history of South Asia, including the Indian history. If we talk about the other parts of the world like Europe, there the broader categorization is still in Paleolithic and Neolithic, with relative absence, we can say, of the acknowledgement of a layer or a phase of transition from Paleolithic to Neolithic that can be termed as Mesolithic. Roughly we can accept this period. Is it okay? We can also say 10,000 BC. When we say 10,000 BC, that roughly comes to the same chronology. Then this is a phase of transition, as we discussed, phase of transition from what we can say Paleolithic to Neolithic, and this is also the shortest phase. So if they can ask you questions on which phase is the longest phase of the prehistoric time, if that is Paleolithic, if the question is which one is the shortest phase, generally the answer is Mesolithic. Is it okay? So this much about the chronology. Here phases are not important. If we talk about the tools of the Mesolithic, that is the second important consideration. And you just have to pay attention to what we are discussing in the class. Even if you are not writing these things, it's okay, because everything you have already received in form of class notes in the same manner as I am discussing in these classes. And as I told you, as I requested you in the last class, that if you are taking these classes seriously, you have to take those class notes also very seriously. Those class notes are part of an integrated scheme. Is it okay? So something that I would have dictated you in the class, I have just provided you in print form so that we can save some time for more meaningful discussion. So take those notes seriously, and if you have not read them, it is really very sad, but if you have read, it's okay. So you must have read all these things, that it is phase of transition, it is also the shortest. Now when we talk about the tools of the Mesolithic age, we have some very remarkable developments. We have a general name given to the tools of Mesolithic age. We call them microliths. So Mesolithic tools are known as microliths. Why microliths? Because they are tools of very small sized stones. Micro is small. So microliths are the tools associated with Mesolithic. I hope you still remember the Paleolithic tools. They are chopping tools, hand axes, clavers, blades, burins, flakes. No, those tools are associated with Paleolithic. But when it comes to the tools of the Mesolithic age, we have a general term. We call them microliths, and microliths are the tools made of small sized stones. Now some other remarkable developments also took place when we talk about this, that for the first time we find bone tools. For the first time we find bone tools as part of Mesolithic tool kit. And not only bone tools, we also find composite tools. Composite tools are the tools which are made by combining or joining two tools together for greater ease of operation or greater efficiency. So we all know about the hand axes, but with those hand axes, if a stick is attached, so we can all understand on the basis of our experiences that that tool now would be more effective in terms of a strike, more exact in terms of target. I hope you understand this kind of composite tools. And one example of this composite tool is bow and arrow. That is what we call the missile technology. The term is sounding quite modern, but missile technology is very simple technology in which, and very ancient technology also, in which the target is hit from a distance. You must have heard of, in Indian tradition, we use terms like astra and shastra. So when we have astra, that is when we throw something to hit the target, that technology is called missile technology. So these four remarkable developments took place in terms of the tools when we reached the Mesolithic stage of cultural development, which is in Indian subcontinent is placed between around 15,000 BP and 5,000 BP. Is this position clear? Which is something representing a phase of transition from Paleolithic to Neolithic. Is it okay? So this much about the tools of Mesolithic age. All these things, let me remind you, are written in your class notes. Now, if we talk about the third important dimension, that is climate. So I hope you remember that in the Paleolithic age, the climatic condition was Pleistocene. That is also termed as the Ice Age. And what were the characteristics of the Ice Age? We discussed in the last class that the climate was cold and dry, without any remarkable trace of what we call hydrological cycle, that is rainfall, precipitation, and most part of the earth covered with ice sheets, resources of the earth locked under ice sheets. We have floral resources, faunal resources, but they were not fit for human consumption. And we also made a comparison with the kind of climate we find on both the poles even today. They can be accepted as remnants of or residuals of the climatic condition that is called Pleistocene. And probably that was the reason why in the Paleolithic age we find such a slow pace of development, because nature was not favorable and human resources were also very limited. If modern man appeared towards the end of the Paleolithic, that is in the upper Paleolithic age, not in the middle and the lower Paleolithic ages. But now things are going to change in the Mesolithic age. And what we find is that from Pleistocene of the Paleolithic, we have a transition towards a Holocene. And this Holocene is still continuing. We today in the 21st century, geologically, are living in the same age that is called a Holocene age. So if Pleistocene was cold and dry, not very fit for human progress, except when we had phases of interglaciation, we discussed alternate phases of glaciation and interglaciation. Now the climate is becoming from cold and dry to what we can say warm, and when it is going to be warm, it is also going to be wet. Warm and wet. Now you can easily imagine, everything is not here for mugging up. There are certain things for understanding also, and they are more important. Now if the climate is becoming warm, climate is becoming wet, what kind of changes we can expect on this planet Earth? What kind of impact this climate is going to have on the evolution of different species, different plants, different animals, or in terms of providing a more conducive environmental condition for cultural progress? This is something that we can guess on our own. So if climate is warm and wet, we can have what? Certain developments I have mentioned in your class notes. That we can have melting of glaciers. They are still melting on the poles and we are perceiving them as threats. Melting of glaciers. But those glaciers melted not on the polar areas, but in the temperate zones and in other zones. So if melting of glaciers taking place, then what will happen? Evaporation, condensation, precipitation. So we can say that beginning of hydrological cycles. That is nothing but rainfall. Is it okay? Then what will happen? Formation of water bodies. See, this kind of favorable changes are going to take place. All these details I have mentioned in your class notes. A formation of water bodies. These are the logical connections we can establish on our own. Formation of water bodies. Then what will happen? You tell me. I think two-way communication is not visible here. So there may be some technical problem, but even if you are not replying to me, at least think on your own. Is it okay? The process of thinking is very important in this preparation. So we can have melting of glaciers, we can have hydrological cycles, we can have formation of water bodies. When we have formation of water bodies, don't you think we can have new resources also, water resources available? Now here we can also include fishery now. I hope the spelling is correct. If not correct, I would like to be corrected. F-I-S-H-R-Y, fishery. And then, don't you think now more and more parts of the earth available for human habitation? That surface of the earth now cleared of the ice sheets. So more space available for human habitation. Yesterday we discussed how earlier habitation was mainly possible around the equatorial zones, where we have the straight sun rays and relatively warm climate. But now more parts of the earth witnessing climate change from Pleistocene to Holocene, so more space available for human habitation. And if more space is available for human habitation, it can lead to what? A spread of human settlements. It can also lead to so many other things. Now you can easily imagine that if the surface of the earth is exposed now, and it is exposed now because it is now no longer covered with ice sheets in a larger parts of the world. So when this happens, the soil or the surface is now exposed to both sunlight and also to the rainfall, because hydrological cycle has started. Now when this happens, that the soil is exposed to both sunlight and rainfall, what can be the natural consequences? What comes to your mind? Don't you think that we can have new kind of organic activities? Even today, sunlight is very important, rainfall is very important. And when soil and the resources which we find in the soil combined with the resources offered by the sun and by the rainfall, what wonders can be created? So what we find is that in the Mesolithic age, resource base is changing. Now some of the food grains that we cultivate and consume today are supposed to have developed in the Mesolithic age in the wild forms. Later on they came to be cultivated. But cultivation is possible only when we have the availability of certain species fit for cultivation. And it is generally believed that Mesolithic age provided those kind of species, those kind of plants which were fit for cultivation. And naturally in the next phase of cultural development, that is called Neolithic, agriculture was going to be the mainstay of the subsistence of the people. So availability of new resources, some plants, certain herbs fit for cultivation, and not only in terms of plants and herbs, also in terms of animals now. If climate is changing, it is going to have some impact also on the nature of the animals which were available, or the faunal resources which were available. You must have heard of that necessity is the mother of invention. So why do we have small tools? Why do we have missile technology in the Mesolithic age? Because we find that the resource base was changing. Now instead of slow and heavier animals of the Pleistocene age, now we can expect swifter animals, smaller animals, which were not only fit for human consumption or more fit for human consumption, but their utilization also required what we can say hunting kind of thing, and what running animals to be killed now. So missile technology and smaller tools of the time, that is of the Mesolithic time, are explained on the basis of changing resource bases and the changing ways of utilizing them. We can use all these points also for essay writing, that the close connection between the climate, resources, pace of development, stages of development. On this planet, this drama has been unfolding for long, and we are part of this drama. We are not living isolated from history. We are still Homo sapiens sapiens, and we are still facing the climate. We are still facing the obstacles created by the climate, and there are so many other things. Is it okay? So I have got some responses here from your side. The change in the atmosphere, very good. Settlements near water bodies, very good. Growth of forest and vegetation, Arindam Pushkar, very good. Advent of a smaller and swifter animals came into existence, Rohit Nandan Dikshit, good. Then we have domestication of animals also started. Yes. So I hope you understand the significance of the Mesolithic age. And since Mesolithic age is a very important part of our cultural development or cultural evolution, it is not only important for the so-called history part, it is also important for the so-called cultural part. Is it okay? So major Mesolithic changes can be asked. As I can infer from the responses given to you, that I think very few of you have gone through the class notes shared with you. And this is not very encouraging kind of a response. Because I expect more answers, more number of answers, and that is something, whatever I am discussing already provided to you 2 days back. So if you still remain unfamiliar, this is not very good thing, not very healthy thing. So invention of fire. Fire was invented or fire was discovered. Shivam Pathak, if you go through the class notes on Paleolithic, the fire and use of fire is associated with the Upper Paleolithic. I have specifically mentioned. So before Mesolithic we find the use of fire, and that is hearth fire basically. Fire was wild. Wildfire was always there. Increase in population, yes, that will happen. That will happen, increase in population. Growth of fastest vegetation, settlements near. Yes, good number of responses. So now the responses are at satisfactory level. So now I hope understand what kind of changes are possible, and we have discussed these changes, that more and more part of the earth's surface available for human habitation, soil exposed to sunlight and rainfall, beginning of new organic activities, evolution of new animals, evolution of new plants. Now, all these changes are associated with Mesolithic, and those changes can be related to a change in the climatic condition from Pleistocene to Holocene, and the limitations and obstacles created by cold and dry climate to the opportunities and resources provided by a climate that was becoming warm and wet. And we have people who say that we are still living in the Holocene age, and the kind of resource base we have today, similar kind of resource base has started developing around this time and at this stage of cultural development. Is it okay? Now if we proceed further, and if you take note of the human species, I hope that this is quite understandable, that once we have the appearance of modern man in the Upper Paleolithic age, that is before Mesolithic, we find now a stability. Even today we are the modern man, that is Homo sapiens sapiens. So we can say that the process of human evolution almost completed, though it is still not completed, we are still evolving, but just for the sake of convenience we can say that modern man had evolved in the Upper Paleolithic age, and in the Mesolithic age we have the same thing. But what we find is that human resource developed in terms of modern man, and now that came to be combined with the natural resources which came to be offered by the Mesolithic age. And see what wonders we have created, that just in 10 to 15,000 years, see the level of development. And before that, millennia after millennia, we have what? Almost same pace of development and same cultural characteristics. So here the human species is not important, but remarkable changes are going to take place in the Mesolithic subsistence pattern. So what we find? Hunting continued. I think that is still continuing. Food gathering also continued. Still continuing. Now we have appearance of fishery. Appearance of fishery. That is fishing. Fishing as a subsistence strategy. They are still continuing. But now we also have the animals fit for domestication. So domestication of animals. Fishing and domestication of animals. These two things are appearing in the Mesolithic age and can be directly associated with the Mesolithic subsistence strategy. But we also have something continuing from the past of the Mesolithic, that is Paleolithic, and those are hunting, food gathering, and also what we can say as scavenging, that is subsisting on the flesh of dead animals. So those old techniques is still continuing, but we have appearance of fishing and domestication of animals. Is this question clear to all of you? So if the question is something like this, suppose if they give you consider the following subsistence strategies, like 1 hunting, 2nd food gathering, 3rd scavenging, 4th fishing, and 5th domestication of animals. As instructed, you have considered them. Now they can ask you questions like this. Which of the above mentioned are associated with the Paleolithic subsistence pattern, or alternatively, another question, Mesolithic subsistence pattern? So they can give you options like this, the way they are doing. That A, 1, 2, 3, B, 1, 2, 4, 5, C, 4, 5, D, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I hope you understand the way they are asking questions nowadays. These are the facts, these are the details, but they are not needed to be marked up. Is it okay? Just to be understood. So can you tell me, if the question is which of the above mentioned, that is these subsistence strategies, are prehistoric? If this is the question, which one is the prehistoric? What is going to be your answer? Anyone? What is going to be your answer if the question is which of the above mentioned subsistence strategies? They are mentioned on the board. They are mentioned on the board. Above mentioned subsistence strategies are prehistoric. Then D. Okay, I have got many answers, that is D. But let me change the question now. And if I ask you, which of the above mentioned subsistence strategies are Paleolithic? Then I have changed the question. Which of them are Paleolithic? Then what will be the answer? I have changed the question. Now the question is, which of the above mentioned are associated with Paleolithic? Dibya Jha, A. Yes, you people have got the answer. A. That is only 1, 2 and 3. And if there is any question like this, that which of the above mentioned are associated with, please show the board, which of the above mentioned are associated with the Mesolithic, then which one is going to be the answer? Which of the above mentioned subsistence strategies are associated with Mesolithic? Then the purpose is just to familiarize you that how these facts and details can be utilized by examiners for asking questions. At times they appear to be very innovative, strange, unknown, But strangeness is basically introduced by manipulation of the facts. Not D. For the last question, I think the answer is C, because only 4 and 5th are associated with Mesolithic. The reason is very simple. What is new in the Mesolithic age? Only 4 and 5th. Other 3 representing continuity from the past. Not our past, but the past of the Mesolithic time. Hunting, food gathering and scavenging. So despite the fact that in Mesolithic age we find almost all the 5 subsistence strategies, if the question is specifying only about Mesolithic, then we have to go with what developed particularly in the Mesolithic age, and that is 4 and 5th. Is it okay? So in that case answer is going to be the C. But there can again be some manipulation in the instructions, that instead of asking Mesolithic, they can ask question in a different manner. So depending upon the understanding of the question, we have to respond. Okay, sir, why we consider rock paintings with Mesolithic age? It was found in Paleolithic also. See, if we talk about the rock paintings, they were first discovered by, I have mentioned this name also in your class notes, by a very famous archaeologist, A.C.L. Carlyle, in the hills near Mirzapur. And then after that we have many places, but particularly important is Bhimbetka, which has produced large number of natural caves and rock shelters, more than even 500, 600 around. And in most of them we find paintings, rock paintings, and also engravings on the stones. We call them petroglyphs. Now when historians started dating of the rock paintings, one thing was generally agreed upon, that the oldest of them can be traced back to the upper Paleolithic age. Is it okay? But most of them are associated with the Mesolithic age. And that's why the rock paintings are associated with the Mesolithic age. Abhishek, I hope this position is clear, because they are mainly associated with the Mesolithic. But we can go back to even early Paleolithic, upper Paleolithic, to find their origin. So it is just about a scale of development, and that's why when we talk about the rock paintings, they are generally considered as part of the Mesolithic art and not part of the Paleolithic art. Is it okay? So I hope now we are clear about the human habitation, that is subsistence pattern associated with the Mesolithic. And then what will happen? Next important consideration for us, I hope you are now getting reminded of whatever you have already read in the class notes. That now if we talk about the next dimension, that is what? Settlement pattern. So if we talk about Mesolithic settlement pattern, we find some remarkable changes. I have mentioned them in your class notes also. That if we talk about the geographical distribution, it remained almost same. That is the same areas. That is except the Indus plains, except the Gangetic plains, and the areas of northeast and Malabar coast. We find Mesolithic sites almost in all the hilly parts of the subcontinent. So geographical distribution almost remained the same as Paleolithic. But we find a little shift in the ecological basis. And now for the first time we also find that the people started residing in the plains, and particularly plains near hills. And in the Indian subcontinent we have a valley, we identify the valley as Velan Valley. There is a river called Belan, and the valley of this river is Belan Valley. Now the region between Allahabad and Banaras is identified as Belan Valley, and this is near the hills of Mirzapur and Vindhya. So for the first time here in the Belen Valley, we find Mesolithic sites, that is moving beyond the hills. Now human settlement moving beyond the hills. And this is a very remarkable change in the Mesolithic age so far as the ecological systems are concerned. Is it okay? Now in the same region, we also find some remarkable developments in the habitational structures. Throughout the Paleolithic age, we do not find evidence for any artificial dwelling units. And the Paleolithic men generally occupied natural caves and rock shelters. But now in the Mesolithic age, we have some evidence related to artificial dwelling units. Artificial dwelling units, we can say them habitational structures. Now when we talk about this artificial dwelling units or habitational structures of the Mesolithic people, we have discovered them in the same region, that is Belen Valley. But our evidence is very, what we can say, indirect. In the Belen Valley, we have discovered something that we call post holes. Post holes. Now in any kind of construction of artificial dwelling units, we can assume that the pillars or posts are used. Those pillars are no longer existing, but the holes created by them are existing. And we have typical pattern. So archaeologists have decided or determined on the basis of these post holes that the people in the Belen Valley living at the Mesolithic stage of cultural development were the first people who started constructing artificial dwelling units for them, which can be identified as habitational structures. So these are some changes which are taking place in the Mesolithic age if we talk about what we can say the ecological system and habitational structures. Now if we talk about others, here we are going to have many remarkable developments. As we have seen that in the Paleolithic age, if we talk about other developments, we have nothing more than the beginning of painting and the use of hearth fire to mention as part of the other developments. But here in case of Mesolithic, we have very remarkable developments which are taking place. For example, first is an increase in the population. Population is increasing. Now, increasing population is also about increasing human resource. Now, it is generally believed that with more control on the resources established in the Mesolithic age and with more availability of resources available in the Mesolithic age, we find greater stability in the life, and greater stability in the life led to greater procreational activities. So we have increase in the population. And that is suggested by increasing number of the settlements and also by their increasing sizes. Whatever be the case, population growth is something that is associated with the Mesolithic age, and we have some traces suggesting the same, and we should understand that here population growth is also about growth or development of human resources. Today we consider population growth mostly as burden, though we also talk about what we can say demographic dividends, but then we all understand the situation. Now, second thing, here we have the beginning of burial system. Burial system, that is intentional disposal of the dead bodies. Now it can suggest so many things. It can suggest development of institutions of family or natural love and affection in the relationships. It means there were certain people who felt themselves responsible towards you even after your death. That is what family bondages and those kind of things have been inferred by historians. But as part of this burial system, we also find something we call grave goods. Grave goods are the goods which are placed inside graves. So for the first time burial system, for the first time grave goods, and these grave goods have helped us a lot in the process of historical reconstruction. Grave goods are the goods which are found inside graves. Is it okay? And they are supposed to have been put inside graves in the belief that they would be utilized by the dead person. It means there is some sort of belief also in the continuity of life after death. We cannot be sure of the forms of continuity, whether in hell or in heaven, or in form of ghosts or spirits, or simply as part of transmigration of the soul, that is cycles of birth and death. We can't predict that. But some sort of continuity in the life even after death, this notion became clear to the people in the Mesolithic age, and this we infer from their burial system and also from the grave goods. Further, a strengthening of the same notion is by another developments which we can place in the category of others, and that is again related to the same. You must have heard of something that is called double burial. That is two persons buried together. And all this evidence mainly from the Balan Valley. Mainly from the Balan Valley. Now in case of double burials, we have a man and a woman buried together, and we have many instances like this. Now how to infer this? So historians have inferred these tendencies in so many different ways, and some of them have gone to the extent of suggesting the prevalence of an institution like sati in such a remotest past of the subcontinent. But we should not accept, or we can't accept such radical propositions, because we have evidence of sati in the later days, and that is a part of historical tendencies. Shivam Sarthak, use of colored pottery. In Mesolithic age we don't find use of pottery. Leave aside the colored pottery. Post holes are the holes created by pillars or posts used for constructing dwelling units. This is for Rohit. Already answered to by Rahul Srivastava. So what I was suggesting you is that we can't go to that extent to accept the prevalence of sati, but we can accept certain things. That if we talk about the institution of marriage in the historical time, if we talk about the socio-cultural evil like sati in the historical time, and if you try to trace the ideological background or moral background, or what we can say philosophical background behind these practices or these institutions, we generally reach a conclusion that there was contemplation of some sort of permanent bond between two individuals or between two souls. And that forms the basis of the institution of marriage in our culture. That marriages are solemnized not only for one life, but they are what? Bondages for so many lives. The same is the case with sati. One is supposed to accompany the partner because there is a perpetual bond, a bond which cannot be broken, should not be broken. This is how we find moral justification for this kind of institutions and these kind of practices. Now, we cannot use the term sati, but we can accept that even in the Mesolithic age, we have some sort of belief not only in the continuity of life after death, but also in the perpetuity of human relationships after death. Now, this much inference we can draw. But we cannot go to the extent of accepting the prevalence of sati. At least we are not going to use the term sati for this. Is it okay? So this much about the Mesolithic people. And we can now easily contrast or compare the Mesolithic cultural traits with the Paleolithic cultural traits. And here we have to particularly appreciate the role of a climate change from Pleistocene to Holocene, and how new opportunities and new resources were available which were utilized properly by the new man. Here the new man was the modern man who had already appeared by the end of the Paleolithic, that is in the upper Paleolithic, in form of Homo sapiens sapiens. So this much about the Mesolithic age. Is this position clear to all of you? So these two topics are over. You have the notes, revise them. And those people who are appearing this year, again I would be suggesting you not to read anything else than the class notes. But I'm not going to give you the guarantee that you are going to have questions from this. Those kind of guarantee system is not, I think, morally correct. But this is what you can do in the minimum available time, that is yesterday or day before yesterday someone was counting as 85 days or 95 days. Is it okay? So don't be over ambitious if you are attempting this year, and stay focused on the class notes. At least know this much. Now I have a question, that is querns and mullers in the Mesolithic age. So they are food processing devices. You can find even today in the traditional households or in the rural households. Now, what in Hindi we call them okhal and musal. So in the Mesolithic age we have evidence for querns and mullers, and some historians believe that the people had started using newly appeared food grains widely available, though they had yet not started a cultivation, but they had started using some wild food grains, and that's why we have this kind of food processing devices. Is it okay, Snehal? Now let us move on to the next topic, and that is Neolithic. And this is now comparatively easy, and we can do it in a faster manner because now you know the pattern. If we talk about the Neolithic chronology, that is around 7000 BC. We have converted now BP into BC. Yesterday I explained you how we separate calendar time. So absolute time I have now converted into calendar time. That is 7000 BC is around what? 9000 BP. So there is an overlap. Here we can also write around 9000 BP. Is it okay? Now from this time to around 1500 BC. This is something that we assign to the chronology of the Neolithic settlements in the Indian subcontinent. But here we have now some geographical variations. What we find is that the oldest Neolithic cultures developed in the northwestern parts, and northwestern parts was going to take lead in terms of historical progress. Here we have the oldest settlements which are identified as Neolithic, and here the most important settlement you must have read in your class notes was Mehergarh. Mehergarh is particularly known for its cultural continuity. So oldest site is Mehergarh. If the question is oldest agricultural site or oldest Neolithic site in the subcontinent, if they ask you a specific site, then Mehergarh. If you talk about the region producing such sites, the northwestern region, and here chronology is around 7000 BC. But if we talk about the Neolithic sites of central India, and particularly the Neolithic sites of Belan Valley, so they are traced back to around 4000, 5000 BC. That is later than the northwestern, but is still older, much older. And in other parts of the subcontinent, in other parts we can have northern Neolithic, that is also called Kashmir Neolithic, Eastern Neolithic, that is areas of Bengal, Bihar, and also the southern, mainly Raichur Doab. In these areas, Neolithic sites are dated back to around 2500 BC to 1500 BC. So what we can say that for the first time India's cultural diversity is traceable to this extent, when we can also prepare a regional profile in terms of chronology for the Neolithic sites. Then, if we talk about the Neolithic tools, which are the cultural markers, these tools are more sophisticated than the tools of Paleolithic and Mesolithic that we can easily understand. And the sophistication is mainly in terms of the technique of what we can say grinding and polishing. This has started. And such tools are also known as ground and polished tools. We also call them SELTS, celts. So if microliths are associated with Mesolithic, celts are associated with Neolithic. And in what way celts are different from earlier tools? They are different because they are ground and polished. That simply means that we have application of the technique of grinding and polishing. Now what is the technique of grinding and polishing? I think we all are familiar. If you are familiar with agriculture, you must have seen that certain agricultural tools or devices, after some time, they become useless or they don't remain that effective. So rural artisans, particularly iron smiths, or at times even in our homes, we followed a technique of grinding and polishing them. You must have heard of this kind of techniques. Butchers in urban areas, you must have seen in the old days, barbers using the same technique. Even today this technique is used. And that led to the economy of both raw materials and efforts. So every time a tool is not effective or is rendered ineffective by overuse, you need not have a new tool. You can apply the technique of grinding and polishing and you can restore the efficiency of that old tool. And that of course is less costly in terms of resources and also in terms of labor. So this economy of raw materials and the economy of efforts, something that is associated with the Neolithic celts, make them quite remarkable. And this is supposed to be one of the important landmark in the history of evolution of prehistoric tools. Yes, someone is saying Hasiya and edge sharpening. Yes, Rahul, you have got it right. That is something like edge sharpening. We all are familiar. You just have to recall and remind yourself of the old days. So Neolithic tools are celts. Now if we talk about the climate, don't you think that the climate now remains the same, that is Holocene? It did not change further. Nowadays it is changing, but we have different theories. Few scientists accept the climate change as a reality. Some others deny, and they say that climate has always been fluctuating this way or that way. And amidst all these fluctuations, we have some stability. So we should focus upon that stability and should not be bothered about the momentary changes noticed in the climate. They don't reflect a climate change, rather they reflect some momentary adjustments. So scientists are divided. So we can't say that climate is changing or not changing, at least in our time, but more number of scientists are of the opinion that climate is changing. Now to which direction we are heading, we don't know. From Holocene to which other scene. But one thing is clear, that once we have the Pleistocene, around 10 to 15,000 years earlier, we have broadly continued in the Holocene phase of cultural climate. So Mesolithic people also lived in the Holocene, Neolithic people also lived in the Holocene, and same is the case with other subsequent cultural patterns, including we the people living in the 21st century. We are also experiencing the same climatic condition. And the same is the case with human species. Here also we have the modern human beings like Homo sapiens sapiens. Homo sapiens sapiens. So here we do not have remarkable changes. But the most remarkable change in the Neolithic pattern of cultural development is going to take place in the subsistence pattern. Is it okay? We have already talked about hunting, food gathering and scavenging in the Paleolithic, appearance of some new like fishing and domestication of animals in the Mesolithic. Now we have domestication of plants. Domestication of plants. That what we can say? Agriculture. So agriculture started in the Neolithic age. And this is the most remarkable cultural marker of a Neolithic site. That is evidence of agriculture. Agriculture can also be termed as domestication of plants. And as we discussed, the oldest site with evidence for beginning of agriculture or further domestication of plant in the Indian subcontinent is Mehergarh, situated in the Baluchistan region of Pakistan today and in the northwestern parts of undivided subcontinent. Now with agriculture, what kind of changes may be possible? One thing is clear, that now man had greater command over resources. Not only domestication of animals, so every time you are hungry, that is very desirable, Ganji Biswanathan, but limitations of time, limitations of so many other things, I can't specify the specific questions. I can talk about the general pattern of the questions. Is it okay? In any case, UPSC is not going to repeat the previous questions. But then there is something that is expected of you also. In the very first class, I requested all of you to familiarize yourself and to stay constantly in touch with the question papers for both PT and Mains. So this is something that you can do on your own, and we should not waste our common resources, that is class time, on this exercise. But naturally, I am supposed to talk about the pattern, general pattern of the questions, not about the specific questions. Is it okay? So don't expect me to go to that extent for the obvious limitations that we have. Is it okay? And that will also lead to somewhat deviation. So we need to stay focused. The content's important. Familiarize yourself with the questions on the basis of your self-exercise and constant touch with the question papers. I hope this is a clear, Ganji. Ganji Venkata. So now what kind of changes we can expect with agriculture? Greater stability. There are people who say that we have now early agricultural and farming communities. So if the question is, when do we find early agricultural and farming communities, the answer is Neolithic. It means now we have emergence of peasants as a social class. It means we are now going to have a relatively stable life. in relatively permanent habitational structures. No habitational structure is permanent, but only relatively permanent habitational structures. And see, domestication of animal already started. Animals already started in the Mesolithic age. Now we have domestication of plants. Don't you think this is the essence of what we can say rural economy? That is emergence of rural settlements, yet not urban. Emergence of rural settlements. So from nomadic life to sedentary life, from hunting, food gathering to the life of peasants. But that does not mean that the old subsistence patterns came to an end. They continued. In the very first class we talked about overlapping nature of the historical tendencies. Now what other changes we can expect? And this is again on the basis of our logical inferences. We can understand so many things. So early agricultural and farming communities, relatively stable life in relatively permanent habitational structures with what kind of occupations? Agriculture and domestication of animals. And such people, such settlements are identified as rural settlements. So we can say we have the beginning of rural settlements. In rural areas even today, the most primary activity associated with agriculture and domestication of animals. If that is the case, then what else? That is fourth. I have mentioned all of them. We have a person, Gordon Childe. He was an anthropologist cum historian cum scientist. He has used a term, agricultural revolution. Though the idea of a revolution is doubted, but this term has meaning and significance for us. Agricultural revolution. And this agricultural revolution is also termed as Neolithic revolution. So what they can do is that they can ask you questions related to the elements of or constituents of the agricultural revolution or Neolithic revolution. And we can mention the same things as part of the constituents or elements of the agricultural revolution. And this term was coined by, or not coined by, but used by Gordon Childe. I have mentioned his name in your class notes. Most of you may be familiar with him as Neolithic revolution or agricultural revolution. So now when we have emergence of rural settlements and when we have agriculture, don't you think we are going to have surplus production? In hunting, in food gathering, in scavenging, surplus production is not possible. And even if possible, that surplus cannot be preserved for a longer period of time. So instead of killing one bird, you killed two birds. You produced a surplus, but how long you are going to preserve the other bird? That was beyond or more than what was required by your subsistence. But the beauty of agricultural surplus is that here surplus can not only be produced, but surplus can also be preserved. So for the restoration or for the preservation of surplus, we have now beginning of pottery. So someone was saying about decorative pottery in the Mesolithic age. That is not true. Pottery traditions started with the Neolithic, and based on this, in Neolithic we identify pre-pottery phases and pottery phases. We also call them ceramic phases and aceramic phases. Aceramic is that is without pottery, and then we have ceramic. Ceramic technique is what? When something is burnt in fire to make that thing more solid, more permanent, that technique is called ceramic technique. So brick making, pottery making, all these are examples of ceramic technique. So we have ceramic phases, aceramic phases, we have pre-pottery phases also. Earlier pottery handmade and not fire baked. But later on we have wheel turned and also fire baked. And then use of wheel, and here use of wheel for pottery making, and that's why we specify use of potter's wheel. It means the horizontal motion of the wheel was to be utilized, yet not the vertical motion. the utilization of the vertical motion of the wheel will lead to the modes of transport and communication that started with the Indus Valley civilization, or at least we have evidence from the Indus Valley civilization. Is it okay? I have been constantly getting some interesting responses, and I'm happy to see them. At least you are paying attention to, and some of you seems to have also read the class notes. Others are also supposed to do the same. So crops cultivation, changes in the settlements, Tejika, Arindam, Shivam, Rohit. So these are the names which are being frequently repeated here with their responses. So we have use of potter's wheel, we have beginning of pottery, we have relatively settled life in rural settlements, we have early agricultural and farming communities, and all these elements are part of what we can say agricultural revolution or Neolithic revolution. So this much about the subsistence pattern, and not only subsistence pattern but also about the settlement pattern and other developments. And naturally with each passing phases of historical evolution, we have more and more number of people, that is population growth is going to be an important feature. Is this okay with everyone? So this much about Neolithic. Now, when we talk about the Chalcolithic phase, so generally Chalcolithic sites are closely associated with the Neolithic sites, and they represent what we can say a more advanced level of cultural evolution of those sites. We have all these traits plus use of metal, and that metal was copper. So when copper came to be added, we have the Chalcolithic. It was a very remarkable development. And I have mentioned the chronology of Chalcolithic sites in some parts of the country. The most remarkable Chalcolithic culture in the Indian subcontinent was Jorwe culture with its two sub-sites, Inamgaon and Daimabad. I have mentioned some others also in some other parts. What we have to know is that Chalcolithic chronology, I have mentioned the chronology also, that is generally placed between 3500 BC to around 500 BC. This is the broader category for Chalcolithic chronology. Regarding tools, we have only new addition, and that is what? Now we have metal tools also, that is tools made of copper. Climate remains the same, human species also remains the same. If we talk about the subsistence pattern, that is again on the basis of the same, that is agriculture, domestication of animals, and previous ones like hunting, food gathering, they continued, they are still continuing. But we have now what? More advanced kind of agriculture. So we can have greater crop diversity in the or at the Chalcolithic stage. Likewise, we have larger settlements and settlements with what we call settlement hierarchy. That is a larger settlement surrounded by a smaller settlements with forward and backward linkages, but yet not urban centers. Urbanization and urban centers are not generally associated with a Chalcolithic people. Elsewhere, in other parts of the world, we have urbanization even at the level of Neolithic. That is another issue. In our subcontinent, Neolithic cultures and Chalcolithic cultures both remained rural in their outlook, and we don't have urbanization, but we have greater craft specialization, we have more crop diversity, we have larger settlements also with settlement hierarchy. So all those features of the Neolithic in their more advanced form combined with metal constitute what we can say the Chalcolithic age of cultural development. And some specific cultures I have mentioned in your class notes, so follow them from there. I think Chalcolithic is also clear to all of you. Regarding pottery, of course, here we have the decorated pottery. So if we have greater degrees of development in all those Neolithic features at the Chalcolithic stage, we also have now more sophisticated kind of pottery, and that pottery now started taking some motifs which are accepted as decorative devices or decorative motifs on the pottery, and that is a remarkable development at the Chalcolithic stage of cultural development. Other features are almost same as we find at the previous stage of Neolithic, and that's why generally we use the expression Neolithic Chalcolithic for certain sites at which we have a direct shift from Neolithic stage to Chalcolithic stage with addition of copper at the Chalcolithic stage of a cultural evolution. Then the last one of this prehistoric cultures, megalithic. And when we talk about megalithic, its chronology is generally placed between what we can say 1500 to around 500 BC. Megaliths are basically large sized stones. Mega is large, lith is a stone. And these megaliths have been found in almost all the hilly regions of the country, but particularly from the Deccan areas, Karnataka, Tamil Nadu, Andhra, that is Deccan and South. They are particularly known for megaliths. And these megaliths have been placed on graves. These graves are identified as megalith graves, and the people associated with these graves are called megalithic people. And this is also very interesting that we do not find settlements or traces of their settlements, and whatever knowledge we have of the megalithic people comes from the study of their graves and the grave goods discovered from them. Now, if we analyze those grave goods, we find that megalithic people were familiar with agriculture. They were also using a typical pottery that is called black and red pottery. And they were also familiar with the iron tools. Is it okay? Now, one thing is very remarkable here, that in the cultural development of the South India, we do not find any specific cultural stage that can be identified as Chalcolithic. It means in the South India, we find a direct jump from a Stone Age to Iron Age. We don't have Chalcolithic Age, we don't have Bronze Age even in the South. Even otherwise, Bronze Age in India was confined to a very small parts of the subcontinent, that is Indus zone, and that too in the mature phase of the Indus Valley civilization. So Chalcolithic is missing from South, even Bronze is missing from the South, and in the South we have from Neolithic a direct jump to megalithic. And megalithic people are known on the basis of their graves, and they are also supposed to be the first people who used iron in the South. So these many details related to this prehistoric cultures. I hope things are clear to you. Rest of the things you can keep on reading the notes. If there is any doubt, any confusion related to the prehistoric cultures, we can now talk about them in the remaining 5 minutes before we take the break for today. I am waiting for your questions and queries in these 5 minutes. If you have any, if you don't have, we can have the break. And after the break, we are going to start with the Indus Valley civilization. Now, you may have different ways for utilizing the break, and I don't know whether you are going to follow my suggestion or not. But I would be suggesting you to have a look at some new class notes shared with you today. Is it okay? And those class notes are on the Indus Valley civilization. So before we meet, after the break, I hope you familiarize yourself with the new notes shared with you related to the Indus Valley civilization. Meanwhile, we have Deepak here. Sir, what type of colors were used in painted pottery during Chalcolithic phases? That I don't know, but it was mainly black. We don't give any specific name to Chalcolithic pottery. We have pottery of the megalithic people known as black and red. We have the pottery of the Indus Valley people known as again black on red, that is black color used. So generally we find the use of black color, that appears to be a general pattern. But we should not be that specific. That's why go through the question papers. They have never asked, and they are not going to ask questions like which specific colors have been used. At best they can ask you questions related to motifs, what kind of motifs have been used, like trees, animals, plants, human beings, because they help us in the process of historical reconstruction. So I'm getting some responses that things are clear. So now after the break, let us begin with the Indus Valley civilization. We are going to have a break for usual duration, that is 5 to 6 minutes. And then meanwhile, you also familiarize yourself with the new class notes shared with you. So thank you so much. We are meeting after the break. So welcome back. I hope you have got the notes. See, one thing that we should not, this is just a matter of approach I am talking about. We should not forget that we are preparing for general studies. And most of the time, the tragedies or the difficulties that we face is because of the reason that we forget this term general. And we make it simply what? A specific studies, and that too in terms of dates and details and very. So don't forget the term general. General studies. General features are important everywhere. And specific features at times, even if asked by UPSC, are those details which we cannot master even if we spend our whole lifetime in preparation. And that's why this preparation is never about, I yesterday also told you, is a chase for extraordinary, because that chase has no limit, no limitations. So we should preserve our energy, our resources, and we should focus upon something which is humanly possible. UPSC is not interested in specific details that you possess. UPSC is interested in, Government of India is interested in the qualities of your mind, your processing skills, the critical faculties of your mind, and not in the knowledge that you possess. UPSC has many other sources. Our Government of India has many other sources. You are not going to be utilized as sources for knowledge. But of course, you are going to be utilized as sources for wisdom. So we have to develop wisdom, and wisdom says that we should not chase something which is practically not possible. So can we master development in one day, which took place in India during the Indian national movement? It will require more than 1,000 lives, and even that will not be sufficient. So if general pattern is clear, what is happening is clear, with details related to landmark events, I think that is the demand of this preparation. And do it everywhere, in economy, in polity, everywhere, and this will make you above average. Is it okay? So stop that craving for very peculiar specific kind of details. They are simply useless, unnecessary burden, and my sincere advice is that even if you find them in the books, you should avoid them, if the general pattern of development is clear. Is it okay? So which specific color used? You have some idea about the questions. Now there was a query also related to that specific details related to upper, middle, and what we can say the lower. Let me tell you that historical knowledge is very limited. hardly we identify tools. Is it okay? So, if we talk about climate, that remained the same. If we talk about the human species, we have talked about the changes, that in the lower Paleolithic we have Homo sapiens, Homo erectus, in the middle we have Homo sapiens, in the upper we had Homo sapiens sapiens, in the lower we had what we can say the core tools, in the middle we had flakes, in the modern we had, or in the upper we had the blades and burins. These are areas where differences are noticeable. In other areas differences are not clear. If we talk about subsistence pattern, if we talk about settlement pattern, if we talk about other developments, they are almost same. So though we have discussed the specifics related to middle, related to upper, related to lower Paleolithic, but let me tell you that specifics are not important anywhere, and even if they may be important, is it okay? They are beyond our capacity, seeing the limitations of our time. So we don't have to be emotional about this preparation, that we should know all the details and everything. General developments, historical processes, and the details related to major milestones. This was just related to the approach, not specific to a particular query made here, but that reflects a tendency, and that tendency is a dangerous tendency in this field of preparation. And most of the time, specific details are related to some current findings, some current discoveries, and something which has been in news in the recent past. So if you are focusing upon the current, most of the details related to history and culture even will be already completed. And then there are certainly going to be some questions of which you will have no clue. With the teachers also at times have no clue regarding the questions asked by UPSC. So these are the limitations that we have to acknowledge in order to have a peace of mind and in order to manage our ambitions. Is it okay? So I hope these points are quite clear. So we have discussed whatever was needed in the case of Paleolithic related to upper, middle and lower in terms of tools and in terms of human species. Whatever distinctions were there, we have noticed, we have discussed. In other matters like chronology, in other matters like subsistence patterns, settlement patterns, things are not well demarcated, so there is no need to discuss, and there is also no need to bother about them. Now let us talk about the Indus Valley civilization. Likewise, the same approach we have to follow in case of Indus Valley civilization. I think a single site of the Indus Valley civilization, maybe Harappa or Mohenjo-daro, is likely to consume all the times which is available to you. We are not researchers, and UPSC can ask anything, but we cannot prepare anything. Is it okay? UPSC has no limitations of resources. We have the limitations of resources, and that's why we need wisdom. We need to focus upon what is humanly possible and what is also expected. So here also, in case of Indus Valley civilization, don't forget that we are going to talk about the general studies of the Indus Valley civilization and not specific studies of the Indus sites and Indus cultural traits. Is it okay? Now first make a list for us. What are the topics which can be important for us? Meanwhile, Rohit has asked कि current village settlements came from the Chalcolithic era. We can't say so, because villages kept on emerging, kept on disappearing. But the village pattern of life, for the first time we notice when we have the Neolithic stage of cultural development, when we have agriculture combined with animal husbandry. So that pattern is established in the Neolithic age, and that continued also in the Chalcolithic age, and that can be noticed even today. But we can't say that modern villages have their Neolithic or Chalcolithic origin. That is not the case. So when we talk about this Indus Valley civilization, this is also called Harappan civilization, and this appears to be more suitable name because it is named after the type site. Type site of a culture is a site which has produced the cultural remains or material remains of that culture for the first time. Now what is important here? We are going to make a list and then we can proceed according to that list. So we are going to have what we can say a general introduction in which we can take note of some general tendencies related to the Indus Valley civilization. I have mentioned some of them also in the class notes I have shared with you. That is introductory paragraph there. And then after introduction, we all know that this civilization was discovered. So certain facts may be related to the discovery. Certain only, not all the facts. We have around more than 1,000 sites of this civilization. Likewise, we can have around more than 1,000 discoverers or excavators, and all the sites have produced what we can say some remarkable details. Even if not excavated, around 100 sites have been excavated, but even those details would be quite unmanageable if we pay attention to the specifics. So facts and details, you must be familiar with a discipline that is called statistics. They remain useless unless until reduced to some meaningful conclusions. So even after being exposed to thousands of details, we cannot infer something that is meaningful, and even 10 or 12 samples or facts may be sufficient if we have an intelligent mind to draw the valid conclusions. Is it okay? So some facts related to the discovery, that is some sites, some individuals, some years. Then we can also talk about the chronology of the Indus Valley civilization. That is quite controversial, or had been quite controversial. Then we can also talk about the extent of the civilization. Here we are locating the civilization in time, and here we can locate the civilization in space. Is it okay? That what all estates are there, and of course some important sites found in those estates which are associated with the Indus Valley civilization. But again, while talking about the traits, we are not going to follow or Indus Valley civilization the old approach that prevailed in early 50s and 60s, that historians kept on discovering sites and kept on making a profile of those sites in terms of what artifacts discovered, what features noticed. That will be quite exhaustive process and useless too. So instead of taking interest in the sites, we should take interest in those things for which the sites are important. That is, we can take interest in the cultural traits of the Indus Valley civilization. And while talking about those cultural traits, we can talk about those sites which are important in context of that cultural trait. So it is not a random coverage of all the sites and all the details discovered or found. It is going to be a calculated and measured response according to the new archaeological processes, that is also called processual archaeology, in which the focus is not on the details but on finding the patterns of development. So for example, we are going to talk about agriculture, and while talking about agriculture, that is a cultural trait of the Indus Valley civilization, we can talk about the sites which are important in context of agriculture. It is not a random collection of all the sites and all the details. Likewise, we can talk about trade, we can talk about craft production, and while talking about trade and while talking about craft production, we can have some sites which may be important, so we can take note of them. Is it okay with everyone? This is just a matter of approach. So we have to talk about the extent and important sites but not their details. Then we can pay attention to features or characteristics. If you go through the notes I have shared with you, I have mentioned the general features or general cultural markers of this civilization. Is it okay? General cultural markers of this civilization. That is after introductory part related to this, that we have wheel-made pottery. I have mentioned the details of pottery. We have the Indus script. We have baked bricks and fixed ratio of those bricks, standard weights, use of bronze, straight roads with a tendency to cross one another at right angles, drainage system, citadels, masonry, wells and tanks, and then a typical pattern of the burial system. So 10 general cultural markers or features I have mentioned. Is it okay in your class notes? And the way they are asking questions, our story may end even here. That what are the general features of the Indus Valley civilization established on the basis of the findings at different sites. But I think we should not confine only to this. We should, or we can be a little more specific while talking about features or characteristics. That we can talk about the economic life of the Indus Valley civilization. Yesterday we discussed that how economic life is closely associated with the social life. So we can also talk about the social life of the Indus Valley civilization. Then if something related to the Indus political life, if we know, we have to know. If we don't know, we have to know that we don't know. It means our ignorance of historical facts is also part of our knowledge. And in the past we have many dark patches, we have many blank areas of which we know nothing. So knowledge of the past and historical knowledge is different from the knowledge that we find in other disciplines. Here, we don't have logical and coherent systems of knowledge that we find in other disciplines, because historical knowledge is conditioned on the basis of availability of sources, and sources, even if available, they have their own limitations, and at places we don't find even sources to reconstruct the past. So in the past we have many dark holes, dark patches of which we know nothing. But we can know about one thing related to them, that we know nothing. And any definite statement related to them we cannot accept as correct a statement. Because historians can ask you questions, examiners can ask you questions to test also the level of your knowledge, but at the same time also the level of ignorance. Is it okay? Whether you are familiar with the level of ignorance which informs the discipline history or not. Is it okay? So we can talk about political features. We can also talk about cultural, but let me specify here, and that's why I am writing. This we are not covering. This is being covered separately as part of Indian culture. Is it okay? Like architecture, literature, artifacts. So I am mentioning the location, but please note that there should be no complaint that I did not cover the cultural aspect and covered only economic, social and political. In the very beginning, in the very first class, I specified that in the classes we are going to focus upon economic, social and political only. Cultural is being covered separately. So while covering cultural, teachers would be escaping economic, social and political that I am covering here, and while covering them I would be escaping, or I would be leaving the cultural aspects. Cultural aspect has been separated from this main course to pay some more attention to it in the light of the new requirements by the UPSC. So there should be no confusion related to this and no unwarranted expectations that cultural topics are not being covered here. Then we can have one more dimension, and that is related to the rise and decline of the Indus Valley civilization. And here rise and decline, some perspectives, that how the rise is seen, how the decline of the Indus Valley civilization is seen or understood. So rise and decline, some perspectives. And then we can also talk about what we can say, causes of the decline. Causes of the decline of the Indus Valley civilization. So these are the important areas. These are the important issues we need to discuss in the class. So, is this approach clear to all of you? Anything beyond this we are not going to discuss in this class. Reason being that they are not part of general, they may be a specific, they may be matters of relative advantages for those people who have expertise in history. So you may have your expertise in chemistry, some other people may have their expertise in other disciplines. So those kind of extraordinary things cannot be covered in this classroom. So is this position clear to all of you? So now let us continue, and apart from the notes or certain introductory parts given to you in form of printed notes, now let us write something in the classroom itself. Is it okay? So just make a general heading, Indus Valley Civilization, in bracket Harappan Civilization, and then start writing few lines and write. The Indus Valley Civilization, you are writing now. The Indus Valley Civilization, also known as the Harappan Civilization. The Indus Valley Civilization, also known as the Harappan Civilization, is supposed to be one of the oldest river basin, RIVER, one of the oldest river basin civilizations of the world. One of the river basin civilizations of the world. What does it mean? Early civilizations developed in the river basins. So one of the oldest river basins civilizations of the world. It was a contemporary of the civilizations. It was a contemporary of the civilizations such as you must be knowing about these civilizations, so keep on writing, such as the Mesopotamian civilization, civilization, in bracket write names of rivers, Tigris and Euphrates. These were the river basins in which we have Mesopotamian civilization. It was a contemporary of civilizations such as Mesopotamian, in bracket Tigris and Euphrates, Mesopotamian. Egyptian, you may have heard of. Here the river is Nile River. Egyptian. And Chinese, one of the oldest civilization, including India. We have the Chinese civilization, Chinese, and here the river is Huangho, that is also called Yangtze, Huangho. So what we have written? It was a contemporary of civilizations such as Mesopotamian, Egyptian and Chinese. In brackets we have also written the names of the river basins in which those ancient civilizations developed. Is it okay? And all of them are representative of what we can say the river basin civilizations or oldest civilizations of the world. We have stopped writing and we are just understanding something. You must be knowing that today in Egypt a very important development is taking place. A new museum has been built in Egypt, I am talking about. And today itself, that is, I don't know the date today, perhaps it is 3rd May or 3rd April. You must have heard of mummies, pharaohs, the ancient Egyptian rulers whose dead bodies have been preserved whose dead bodies have been preserved. You must have heard of pyramids of the Egypt. Now those mummies are being shifted today with all old royal traditions to a new museum. Is it okay? So the same civilization, Egyptian civilizations, Mesopotamian civilization, and the Chinese civilization. Now, so how many of you are familiar with this development? That is, in Egypt, the mummies are being shifted to a new museum. Anyone? This is how we have to pay attention to what is happening related to our past in our time. And that is part of what we can say current affairs in history. And most of the time, specific details which appear to be quite incomprehensible, they have some current connection. So if you pay attention to the current combined with what is traditional, I think your performance is going to be above average. Is it okay? So some of you are familiar with this development which is taking place. Is it okay? And others are expected to have a watch on the developments taking place around you, particularly related to our past. Suppose a new site is discovered. We don't have to accept the conclusions drawn by our media persons known for their knowledge and wisdom, but we can accept them as news items, that something new has been found, something new has been discovered. For conclusions and inferences, we have to rely upon the textbooks. So we have to accept only the textbooks oppositions, but we can note down them as recent happenings or as part of the news items, and they may have some connection with the way they ask questions. So keep an watch also over current developments which are taking place. Even otherwise we have a program called 365. But if you are already familiar, then the consultation would be in a better manner. Now keep on writing in the same paragraph. Resume your writing and write. The Indus Valley civilization or the Harappan civilization. The Indus Valley civilization or the Harappan civilization was not only the most extensive civilization, was not only the most extensive civilization of its time, but also the most developed, in certain respects, not in all respects, but in certain respects, such as town planning and the drainage system. Right? For long, the Indus Valley civilization was perceived as having foreign origin, particularly particularly connected with the Mesopotamian civilization, particularly connected with the Mesopotamian civilization in terms of the diffusion is a spread, in terms of the diffusion of the Mesopotamian cultural elements, in terms of the diffusion of the Mesopotamian cultural elements, or simply the idea of civilization, or simply the idea of the civilization, that this came from outside, simply the idea of the civilization. But this notion is no longer tenable or acceptable. But this notion is no longer tenable or acceptable in the light of some significant differences, between the two civilizations, in the light of some significant differences between the two civilizations, in the light of the significant differences between the two civilizations, some of which are mentioned below, not all but some representative ones, some of which are mentioned below, some of which are mentioned below. Is it okay? So here we can note down some points related to the difference between Mesopotamian civilization and the Indus Valley civilization for obvious reasons, and those reasons are associated with understanding of the origin of the Indus Valley civilization. As we find some historians, particularly belonging to the colonial schools, considering the Indus Valley civilization to be an offshoot or an extension of the Mesopotamian civilization in terms of material elements, or also in terms of the idea of the civilization. That is, some people considering Indus Valley civilization or the makers of Indus Valley civilization to have Mesopotamian origin, and some people say that makers were not of Mesopotamian origin, but the idea of civilization came from Mesopotamia. For long this view was accepted by historians. They had their own motives or their own considerations, but now we don't accept this, and it is in this context we are going to highlight some major differences between the two. So right here the first one, both the civilizations have altogether different scripts, scripts. So scripts don't match. Both the civilizations have altogether different scripts, that is art of writing. So had the same, then some similarity must have been there, but that similarity is not there, and Indus script still remain undeciphered. Mesopotamian script has been deciphered. Second point to write, second difference, that different layout, L-A-Y-O-U-T, different layout of the towns and cities, different layout of the towns and cities, different layout of the towns and cities. So the kind of pattern we find in the Indus Valley civilization, which is we are going to discuss, or you will discuss as part of Indus architecture, that roads and streets have a tendency to cross or to cut across one another at right angles, and then citadels. No, those things we generally do not find in case of Mesopotamia. Mesopotamian layout is immaterial for us. We should know that town planning is different, layouts are different. Then write the third important difference, that is extensive system of canals in the Mesopotamia, extensive system of canals in the Mesopotamia, not noticed in the Indus Valley civilization. So canals are there, part of Mesopotamia, but not of the Indus Valley civilization. The Indus Valley civilization. Of the Indus Valley civilization. Right, different units of weight and measurements. Here also we have the difference. Different units of weight and measurement. Different units of weight and measurement. Different units of weight and measurement. Then right next, the Mesopotamian civilization. The Mesopotamian civilization, particularly known for its priest rulers, P-R-I-E-S-T. We have historical records. Its priest rulers, that is priestly classes also played the role of rulers. Its priest rulers and religious buildings and monuments like pyramids and religious buildings and monuments. Religious buildings and monuments which we do not notice in case of the Indus Valley civilization, which we do not notice in case of the Indus Valley civilization, which we do not notice in case of the Indus Valley civilization. In Indus Valley civilization, we just have one head of a priest and one building which is identified as a religious building, and that is the Great Bath of Mohenjo-daro. Apart from this too, we find nothing to support the contention that the Indus Valley civilization was ruled by priestly classes as we find elsewhere. So these are some major differences, and on that basis generally we don't accept this idea that whether the civilization itself or the idea of civilization came from outside, and that too from Mesopotamia. Now change your paragraph. We are proceeding in the same introductory part, and write, in the Indus Valley civilization, the Indus Valley civilization, Ganji, we don't have evidence for canals, we have wells, we have reservoirs, we don't have the evidence of canals. And when we lack the sources, we can't explain the reason why canals are missing from the Indus basin. Historical knowledge is conditioned on the availability of sources. So if we don't have canals, we don't have canal tracks, we cannot expect simply their existence because of the civilization being situated in a river basin. So after changing paragraph, we are writing that the Indus Valley civilization represents the first urbanization in the Indian subcontinent. Yesterday we talked about the process of urbanization. First urbanization in the Indian subcontinent. In the Indian subcontinent. And also marks the beginning of, and also marks the beginning of, also marks the beginning of the first literate traditions of the subcontinent. The first literate tradition, that is art of writing. First literate tradition of the subcontinent. So urbanization for the first time, literate tradition for the first time, and that's why we use the expression civilization for this. Keep on writing and write. It is also the sole representative of, it is also the sole representative of the Bronze Age. It is also the sole representative of the Bronze Age in the Indian subcontinent. Bronze Age in the Indian subcontinent. And the main representative of, the proto-historic phase. We discussed this even yesterday. Proto-historic difference, proto-historic phase of the Indian history. Main representative of the proto-historic phase of the Indian history. So first urbanization, proto-historic connection, Bronze Age, first urbanization, first literate tradition, most developed in certain respects, most extensive of its contemporaries, connected with Mesopotamia but with significant differences which are not in support of this kind of any connection. These are some important paragraphs or points that we should write as part of the introduction. There is nothing to be explained about weight and measurements, Venkata. You should know that in both civilizations we have different units. What were those units? Forget about them. Tejika is saying use of burnt bricks in the Indus Valley civilization. Yes, that there are many other differences. I have just here taken note of the major ones. Is it okay? So in the textbooks, elsewhere you can find some other differences also. So you can keep on including those differences in the existing knowledge. Now change your paragraph. This much about the introduction kind of things. Now let us talk about the discovery of the Indus Valley civilization. Now it took around almost 100 years to discover this civilization. Many people visited sites like Harappa, Mohenjo-daro without realizing the significance. Some realized the significance in terms of the mounds being historically important, but is still not in a position to reach a conclusion that they represent an altogether new civilization which can trace back the history of Indian subcontinent to around 3rd millennium AD, BC. So here when we talk about the discoverers of this civilization, we have some archaeologists like Dayaram Sahni. Dayaram, he is generally accepted as the discoverer. But before Dayaram Sahni also, we have some people visiting the sites, but they were not as lucky as Dayaram Sahni. He started excavating Harappa in the year 1920-21. And then we have another historian or archaeologist whose name is R.D. Banerjee, Rakhal Das Banerjee. He started excavating Mohenjo-daro, one of the important sites, in 1921, continued throughout, even in later days. And then we have a third person who was guiding these excavations, who was taking interest in these excavations, and the person was the director of the Archaeological Survey of India, Director General of the Archaeological Survey of India, whose name was Sir John Marshall. This man, and these were officers or scholars associated with Archaeological Survey of India, extended his support. He is one of the reputed archaeologists of the colonial days, Sir John Marshall. And this man reached a conclusion by the year 1924 that an altogether new civilization has been discovered. So the formal announcement was made in the year 1924. So these are few names, these are the discoverers that we should know. After this we can ignore other sites, other discoverers, other years. In the popular textbooks, particularly in the guides, you will find long list of what? Sites, discoverers, and what all discovered. For God's sake, and if not for the God's sake, for the sake of your preparation, avoid those kind of unnecessary details. But of course, if there is any recent development taking place at any of the sites of the Indus Valley civilization, and that becomes part of current, that becomes part of the news related to IBC, that can be focused upon. Not an unnecessary details, but of course these basic facts related to the discovery that we should know. So I hope you have noted down. If not, you can write it in language also. So write, the civilization was, resume your writing major terms I have written on the board. Based on this, write the same details in paragraph form. Write, the civilization was first discovered by, the civilization was first discovered by an archaeologist, first discovered by an archaeologist, Daya Ram Sahni, Daya Ram Sahni, who excavated Harappa, who excavated Harappa, who excavated Harappa, in bracket write 1920-21, who excavated Harappa during the years 1920-21, 1920-21. Thus Harappa is, continue writing, thus Harappa is the type site. They can ask you what is type site. Thus Harappa is the type site of the civilization. In bracket write, a site producing material remains for the first time. Type site of the civilization, and in bracket you are writing what does it mean when we use the expression type site, that a site producing material remains for the first time. For the first time. So first sites to be discovered are generally known as the type sites. I hope this position is clear. So thus Harappa is, resume your writing and write, the type site of the civilization, and the civilization is also known as the Harappan civilization, because civilizations are named after their type sites, and thus the civilization is also known as the Harappan civilization. Harappan civilization. Keep on writing in the same. Right, Harappa is situated. Harappa is situated. Harappa is situated on the bank of river Ravi, one of the tributaries of Indus. Harappa is situated on the bank of the river Ravi, R-A-V-I, Ravi, in Sahiwal district, in Sahiwal district of, in Sahiwal district of the Punjab province of Pakistan, in Sahiwal district of the Punjab province of Pakistan. The next important site, Mohenjo-daro, written differently but go with the simple one. The next important site, Mohenjo-daro was excavated by R.D. Banerjee, names written on the board, by R.D. Banerjee during 1921-22. Right, Mohenjo-daro is situated on the bank of the river Indus, in Larkana district, on the bank of the river Indus in Larkana district, Larkana, Larkana district of the Punjab, Sindh province of Pakistan, Larkana district of the Sindh province of Pakistan. At the formal announcement of the discovery of a new civilization, the formal announcement of the discovery of a new civilization was made by the formal announcement of the discovery of a new civilization was made by the then Director General of the Archaeological Survey of India, Director General of the Archaeological Survey of India, Sir John Marshall, in the year 1924. Sir John Marshall in the year 1924. So these are some important details related to the discovery. Now let us talk about the chronology. Change your paragraph and write. The chronology of the Indus Valley civilization. The chronology of the Indus Valley civilization has been a controversial subject. The chronology of the Indus Valley civilization has been a controversial subject for long, largely due to some controversies, related to its rise and decline. Largely due to its rise and decline. It was Sir John Marshall, the same person. It was Sir John Marshall who for the first time tried to ascertain the chronology of the civilization. It was Sir John Marshall who tried for the first time to ascertain the chronology of the civilization based on his analysis of the stratigraphical based on his analysis of the stratigraphical profiles of the civilization, stratigraphical profiles of the civilization, and establishing some chronological connection with chronological connection with the Mesopotamian civilization. Chronological connection with the Mesopotamian civilization. Since it was a contemporary, so if the time of Mesopotamian civilization is known, then we can also have some intelligent guesses related to the time of the Indus Valley civilization, something like this. Now we are stopping here to understand something. I have used this expression, stratigraphical profiles. What does it mean? So see, yesterday we talked about archaeology as a science which studies the material remains or the physical remains of the past societies. Now, how these remains are discovered? So they are discovered through what we can say archaeological processes. No need to write, just for understanding. Archaeological processes like explorations and excavations. These are the archaeological processes. Now, when we rely upon explorations, we generally don't resort to digging. Digging is a very careful process because it has the potential to destroy historical evidence forever. So careful preparations are made, precautions are taken. But when material objects are found from the surface of the soil without any actual digging, we call that process as exploration. So historians, archaeologists are familiar with the areas of possible human habitation, and they just make surveys, explorations, and they pick up whatever they found on the ground without resorting to any process of digging. So that is called explorations. Now most of the Indus sites have been simply explored, not excavated. Not even 10% sites have been excavated. But excavation is a more serious business, and whenever we have excavations, we have the digging. And we identify historical mounds. Mounds are raised parts of the surface of the soil or earth. They can be natural mounds, but historians have this ability to segregate them from the cultural mounds, that is mound prepared by or through human activities over centuries. So historical mounds are discovered and they are excavated. They are excavated, unearthed, and material findings are collected and studied by different experts. They prepare their reports, and based on those reports, historians apply their historical reasoning to reach valid conclusions related to the past and the past cultural traits. So now when we have excavations and mounds are excavated, we have two ways. We call them vertical and horizontal. Now in vertical excavation, suppose this is mound, only a small part is excavated. Suppose this is excavated. And when excavations are done, different layers or strata are identified. So suppose excavation started here, from here, and this is the natural soil. Let me make it a little bigger. This is a historical mound, and this mound is to be excavated. Now the excavation type is vertical. So a smaller part, narrow part of this mound is to be excavated up to or down to the natural soil. Excavation is taking place and different stratas or layers are being exposed. So suppose at the top layer we find artifacts like this, then we find like this, then we find like this. Is it okay? And there can be overlapping also. Once again we can have, suppose, something like this, or different patterns. Now these are stratas or these are layers, and one thing is clear, that this site, whatever may be its name, Suppose its name is Rajendra Place, where this class is taking place. We can say that Rajendra Place is a multicultural site. It can be monocultural also, that is from top to bottom, similar or same artifacts, but that is not the case. So Rajendra Place is a multicultural site. And it is said that the topmost layer is the latest one, unless until reversed by some natural phenomenon. But generally, topmost is supposed to be the latest one, and the lowest is supposed to be the oldest. And they are named like, or numbered like this, in reverse manner. The first layer, the second layer, the third, and the fourth. And suppose here we have artifacts or cultural traits known as A, here we can say B, here we can C, here we can D. So we can talk about Rajendra Place as a multicultural site with 4 layers representing 4 different cultures known as A, B, C, and D. It is something like this. And suppose if the artifacts related to culture C have been discovered for the first time at Rajendra Place. So we can say that Rajendra Place is a multicultural site with cultures like A, B, C, and D, and it is also type site for culture C because the remains of culture C have been discovered for the first time at Rajendra Place. And this is called a stratigraphical profile, and this is called a stratigraphical studies, which is an important part of archaeological excavations associated with all, but particularly associated with vertical. Is it okay? I hope you understand what kind of studies are called stratigraphical studies. We cannot establish absolute chronology, but at least we can establish relative chronology. We can say that A is older, B, C, and what is the cultural sequence or what is the chronological sequence for these cultural types at the site called Rajendra Place. Is this position clear to all of you? Now alternatively we can have, this is an example of what we can say vertical excavation. Alternatively we can have horizontal excavation. The mounds are same, but in horizontal excavation a large part or maybe the whole site is excavated. So this, suppose a large part is excavated. So this is more extensive. And here also we can have stratigraphical profiles, but they are particularly associated with vertical one. We can understand that on the basis of common sense also. This is very good in terms of providing details and a larger picture, but the problem is that horizontal method is cost intensive. So horizontal method has not generally been followed in the Indian subcontinent, particularly in the countries like Pakistan, Bangladesh, India. And as we made a passing reference to the fact that we have more than 1,000 sites of the Indus Valley civilization and not even 10% have been excavated, and even the sites excavated have been excavated mainly by following the vertical, that is less cost intensive method, and only few sites have been excavated on the horizontal basis. Is this position clear? So what we have written? It was Sir John Marshall, you can read whatever you have written, who tried to ascertain the chronology of the IBC for the first time based on his analysis of the stratigraphical profiles. Now we understand, and not only this but also archaeological processes and the types of archaeological excavations, horizontal and vertical. No need to write, this is just for understanding. And then also on the basis of drawing some analogy with the Mesopotamian civilization. Then right, since it was the first attempt, so his findings are important. So resume your writing now and write. He placed the chronology, we are talking about Sir John Marshall, he placed the chronology of the Indus Valley civilization. He placed the chronology of the Indus Valley civilization between 3250 BC. This is the first date we can say. 3250 BC and 2750 BC. he placed the chronology of the Indus Valley civilization between 3250 BC and 2750 BC. Since this is associated with Sir John Marshall, this may be an important figure. After that, figures are not that much important. Right after the invention of carbon 14 method of dating, that is C14. I hope the spelling of carbon is correct. Carbon 14 method of dating, that was perhaps 1949 or 50. After discovery of the carbon 14 method of dating, different sites have produced different chronological frameworks, but it seems that the mature phase of the civilization can be placed between 2600 BC and 1900 BC. Mature phase of the civilization can be placed between 2600 BC and 1900 BC. Is it okay? Stop writing. I hope you understand this expression, mature phase of the civilization. We are again going to understand something on the board, and this is also related to this topic, that is rise and decline of the Indus Valley civilization. We have already written that the issue is controversial, and we have mentioned the first figure by Sir John Marshall and generally agreed figure for the civilization, that is 2600 to around 1900 BC, but in the textbooks you will find many figures, so at times we have lot of confusions. So we should understand certain concepts on the board to simplify the position. Horizontal excavation, Tushar, is when a large part is excavated. In vertical excavation, only a narrow trench is dug to find the different stratas or the layers, and in horizontal, the whole mounds are excavated, or a larger part of the mounds excavated. That is called horizontal excavation. So now let us assume that this is the trajectory of the Indus Valley civilization. Is it okay? We can have rise of the civilization here. We can have beginning of the decline here, and we can have decline of the civilization here. And that's why in social sciences, graphs are not very helpful, because technically speaking, we are reaching the same position, but here this position is not the same as we find here. But in any case, now the chronology that we have ascertained is the chronology of this period can be identified as the mature phase. We are calling it mature phase, and we are giving it a chronology of 2002 BC. Is it okay? Now, which phase is called mature phase of the civilization? The phase in which we have most of the cultural markers with which the civilization is identified. I have shared them in your class notes also. Like here in this phase we find script, we find town planning, some as just for the sake of example. Planning. Here we have use of bronze. I will keep on writing so long as my height is supporting me. So town planning, script, bronze, burnt bricks, drainage system, burial system, typical burial system associated with this civilization, etc., etc. Is it okay? This period is identified as the mature phase. Now what happened before this? So there are people who consider that we have here pre-Indus phase, and there are people who say we have here early Indus phase. Likewise, what happened here? So there are people who say that we have post-Indus, or we have what we can say the late Indus. Now we generally use the expressions like pre and early Indus interchangeably, and the same is the case with post and late, but there is some significant difference that we have to understand. Now, according to colonial explanations, the civilization had a sudden rise. So all these cultural features were borrowed features, and this civilization, which is called the Indus Valley civilization, that means the mature phase of the Indus Valley civilization, had nothing to do with the developments which had taken place earlier. Likewise, it also suddenly disappeared, and the developments which followed the mature phase of the Indus Valley civilization were isolated as scattered developments, nothing to do with the Indus Valley civilization. I hope you understand the nature of controversy now. So, what we find before the Indus Valley civilization here? In the same zone, so we have Neolithic settlements, we just talked about Mehergarh, and we have Chalcolithic settlements. And these settlements were capable of cultivation, capable of using bronze, copper at least, and they were not simply existing, but we have historical evidence that they were developing mutual contacts, cultural contacts, trading contacts, and these contacts were also leading to what we call cultural convergence. Cultural convergence is a very important concept that we need to understand. Convergence we all understand, that is moving towards the same center or same direction. The cultural convergence means what? That we have different settlements in a same area, but in all those settlements, now certain common things are being accepted. Maybe some symbols, maybe units of weight and measurement, maybe the pattern of pottery. Is it okay? So these common elements, they indicate the process related to cultural convergence. So we have historians who believe that before this mature phase of the Indus Valley civilization, in the Indus zone, we find Neolithic and Chalcolithic settlements, and not only their existence, but also evidence related to their growing interaction among themselves. And as a result of that interaction, we also find processes related to cultural convergence. And it is this cultural convergence which took place here that ultimately created conditions for the rise of the Indus Valley civilization. Is it okay? Now some historians mentioned these Chalcolithic cultures or Neolithic cultures, some of them like Amri culture, Nal, Jhukhar, Jhangar, Soti, we have many, Kotdiji, Jhob. So all these cultures were responsible for the growth of mature phase of the Indus Valley civilization, and they continued even in the mature phase of the Indus Valley civilization, reflecting the cultural diversity in the Indus cultural zone. So earlier we had a notion that Indus cultural zone had cultural uniformity. We still accept the concept of cultural uniformity, but we have also started analyzing the elements of cultural diversity, that in such an ecologically diverse zone we cannot have similar settlements and similar lifestyle. So the recent trends are about acknowledging the cultural differences in the Indus zone. So we have different cultures, local cultures, that is what we can say regionalism. Now here we have integration of those features, and then we have localization or disintegration of those features. It means here also we have now Neolithic, Chalcolithic stages, not clearly defined, but here we have some cultures like symmetry H culture, symmetry, don't ask for explanations, I just understand these facts for understanding this trajectory of Indus Valley civilization. Symmetry R37. Now it is believed that after disappearance of this mature phase, we have civilization losing its urban characteristics and continuing in its rural aspect, and rural aspect is associated with Neolithic and Chalcolithic. What we can say late Indus. So this is the trajectory of the Indus Valley civilization. Now if there is, suppose, no agreement or less agreement related to the rise, some people consider that the Indus Valley civilization rose with the rise of Neolithic settlements, and we have discussed the rise of Neolithic settlements in this region around 7000 BC. So can the rise of Indus Valley civilization be traced back to 7000 BC? Again, this is going to be controversial contention. Or when, on which features to consider as mature features to fix this chronology? What to be here connected with this so that we can fix the chronology of post-Indus? So I hope you understand that this kind of confusions are likely to be there, and that's why in the books we find different figures. Now we have historians who consider that what happened here, it happened, and it happened in an isolated manner. Is it okay? And it has no connection with what happened here in this phase, and that's why it can be better called as pre-Indus, that is happening in the Indus region but before Indus Valley civilization and not connected with the Indus Valley civilization. It means here we don't have cultural continuity. It means Indus Valley civilization had foreign origin, it lacked what we can say the local roots. Is it okay? But we have other historians, particularly nationalist historians, who think that what was required for the growth of this civilization was available here in terms of natural resources, in terms of human resources. What else is required than the knowledge of agriculture in the fertile plains of the Indus Basin for the emergence of a civilization like this? So they people consider that what happened here, that is before this mature phase, was connected with Indus and can be termed as early Indus. So those people who see the cultural continuity, they use the term early Indus, and those who don't see the continuity, they use the term pre-Indus for this phase of cultural evolution. The same logic is applied here, that those who see connection, they use the term late Indus, that is connected with Indus, representing the later phase of Indus, and those who don't see connection, they use the term post-Indus, that is after Indus, in the same region but not connected with Indus. I hope you understand the difference between early and pre and late and a post. Is it okay? But on the whole, we generally don't accept this concept now, pre-Indus or post-Indus. We accept the cultural continuity, and we believe that the civilization took some time, and in this phase, early phase can be placed between 1300, is it okay, to around, even if you leave aside Mehergarh, to around what we can say 26, and from 26 to 1900, this is the mature phase, and 1900 to 1300. It means by 1300 we have the civilization losing all the characteristics. Is it okay? And the region came to be dominated by some new cultural tendencies associated with the Vedic people. So this is how we perceive the origin and the decline of the civilization, and this is how we can resolve the controversial issues related to the chronology of this civilization. Is this position clear to all of you? So this much about the chronology of the Indus Valley civilization. You can draw this diagram for your convenience, but more important is to conceptualize the Indus Valley civilization in terms of cultural continuity and the debates related to cultural continuity and cultural discontinuity. Is this position clear to all of you? Whenever I do some board work like this, no, you can keep on making on margins or on some separate pages or maybe in boxes this kind of explanatory parts. But whatever is required for your understanding, I have already written in form of class notes and I am going to dictate them. But these are some additional things that you can keep on writing. So is this position clear to all of you? why the chronology of the Indus Valley civilization is controversial, and how we can perceive the rise, how we can perceive the decline. This phase is urban, both these phases pre and post are rural, that is disappearance of the Indus Valley civilization and the mature phase of the Indus Valley civilization. So, can we proceed now? Now the next important topic here for us is the extent of this civilization. The extent of the civilization, and here we just have some factual details. Is it okay? We have already written that the Indus Valley civilization was the most extensive. Now today, if we try to map, to take note of all the areas covered by it, so there are people who estimate it to be from 680,000 to around 800,000 square kilometer. Now this is the total area. Figures, facts are not important, but just have in mind. Now this area includes Indian areas as well as the areas of modern Pakistan. This will not take much time. Just we cannot kill the 5 minutes which are left here. So this will not take much time. Extend this much kilometer, and then if we talk about the Indian areas, that is India, so we have some states like, or union territories like Jammu and Kashmir, and here we have a site called Manda. You just write as much as I am writing on the board. It will not take 5 to 6 minutes. Jammu and Kashmir. And why Manda is important? Because this is the northernmost site of the Indus Valley civilization. Then they can give you a list of Indian states. Is it okay? Then we can talk about Punjab. And in Punjab, we have many sites, but particularly important is Ropar. Why Ropar is important? Because the first site to be excavated after independence. Then we have Haryana. I'm just taking note of the major sites. Haryana. And in Haryana we have many sites. Is it okay? We have a site called Balu that is recently excavated. Recently excavated. We have context by some other sites like Banwali. But here we can, in case of Haryana, we have one more site, Rakhi Gadi. Rakhi Gadi. And Rakhi Gadi you can remember as the largest site of the civilization. The way things exist, though this issue is always controversial, but if today, if there is any question, which is the largest site of the civilization, and if they specify the Indian areas, Indian territories, go for Rakhi Gadi. If for the whole civilization, then of course it is Mohenjo-daro. But in Indian parts, we have Rakhi Gadi as the largest site. Then we have in Haryana, Rajasthan, we have a site called Kalibangan. This is the only site important for us. Kalibangan. And this Kalibangan is known for certain things like maximum diversity. Maximum diversity in pottery traditions. That is again reflection of cultural diversity of the Indus Valley civilization. And then also known for its mud structures. Mud structures. Kalibanga. Then we have fifth state of India, that is Gujarat. And in Gujarat we have many sites like Lothal. Context wise we can talk about Lothal something more, but here this Lothal is what? A port site, and also known for dockyard. Second, Dhaulavira. Dhaulavira is the largest excavated site for us. So I hope you understand the difference between largest site and the largest excavated site. Again, excavated site is on the basis of what? On the basis of the total area excavated. Then here we also find a site called Rangpur. This is particularly known for red lustrous ware. Again, cultural diversity. That is a type of pottery which is termed as red lustrous ware. That is associated with Rangpur. Then here we have Bhagat Rao. Bhagat Rao, for long it was considered as the southernmost, and even today, if you find Bhagat Rao in the option and not any other option more suitable than Bhagat Rao, go for Bhagat Rao as the southernmost site of the Indus Valley civilization. But we have one more site nowadays, that is called Malvan, M-A-L-V-A-N. This is again the southernmost. So if you find both, go for Malvan as the southernmost site. So this is the fifth estate and some important sites. Then the sixth estate, here we can mention UP, and here in UP we have western part, and here we have a site Alamgirpur. And why Alamgirpur is important? Because it is the easternmost site of the civilization. It is easternmost site of the civilization. Easternmost site of the civilization. Is it okay? So these are some important estates and important sites. I hope you have understood this. In Pakistan we have few sites now important for us and few estates. We have already talked about Punjab province of Pakistan, that is now in Pakistani areas. Here we have only one site important for us, Harappa, and why Harappa is important we know. And we have Sindh. In Sindh we have only one important site for us, that is Mohenjo-daro, and importance of it we know. And then we have Baluchistan. Here we have Mehergarh. Why Mehergarh is important? Because this is the oldest site of the civilization. And then somewhere in Baluchistan we also have, or not that is on the Makran coast, that is the Pakistani coast, we have Sutka Gendor. And why Sutka Gendor is important? Because this is the westernmost site of this civilization. So now we have easternmost Alamgirpur, northernmost Manda, westernmost Sutka Gendor, and southernmost Bhagat Rao or Malvan. Now there are some people who consider a site Daimabad. That is a Chalcolithic site. I have mentioned it in your class notes also, in Maharashtra. And we have 4 copper objects from Daimabad. Though this is very controversial, but if you don't find Bhagat Rao or Malvan, and if you find Daimabad, you can also accept Daimabad as the southernmost site of the civilization. We can't resolve these controversies, but we can understand them, that different historians have different opinions. So if you don't have Malvan and Bhagat Rao, you can go also for Daimabad as the southernmost site of the Indus Valley civilization. Regarding easternmost, no controversy, westernmost, no controversy, northernmost, no controversy, but when we talk about the westernmost, southernmost, we have 3 candidates we can say. And you will have really a bad luck when all the three given in the options. So for this kind of situations, we can only pray. Generally, we don't face them in the real life situation, but they can be quite fearful in the course of preparation. So this is the extent of the civilization in India and in Pakistan, and just ecological extent. And here we have hills, here we have plains, here we have coastal areas. This is just for diversity. Hills, plains, coastal areas, deserts, and here we also have what we can say swamps. These are the different ecological zones in which we have discovered the sites of this civilization. And since we can easily understand that in these ecological zones life can never be the same, so in Indus Valley civilization we can expect broader cultural differences. So with this the class is over. Now you are left with some class notes which have been shared today. Read them, and there you will find the details related to the economic life. So come prepared for the details related to the economic life. I don't think that detailed discussion would be required because that aspect is quite factual. And then after discussing, if discussion is required, the economic life of the Indus Valley civilization, we can proceed to talk about the socio-political life, and then we can also shift to the next topic, that is the Vedic civilization. Is it okay? So, and thanks for this extra 6 minutes according to my watch. I will be thankful to you. Let us meet tomorrow.